I think that this is pretty obvious at this point, but Wizards of the Coast is not a good company at all. And all of the credit that goes to Baldur's Gate 3's success is on Larian Studios. But it is worth of note that they had to work for that opportunity to even develop and work on this franchise, because Wizards of the Coast own this franchise. They own Baldur's Gate. Now, Larian, they had to put all of their money forward, they had to make the huge investment, and if this project failed, they probably would have been out of business. But here they are at the top of the gaming industry now. All eyes are on them for what they do next, and ultimately, Larian doesn't need Baldur's Gate anymore. They can do whatever they want. They can go back to Divinity Original Sin, they can go and do some other new IP, or they could work on another licensed IP. There's been fans from Mass Effect to Fallout to so on and so forth all saying, I would love to see Larian develop a game in our franchise. So it really goes to show that a lot of people are very excited for the future of this company, and I think a lot of the success that Larian experiences right now is because they are a private company. They're not beholden to shareholders. It really is Sven Vink's show, and he just wants to make great games. He's emphasized that multiple times in the past, but just to understand, Wizards of the Coast, again, they own Baldur's Gate. They are now going to be in control of this franchise. Well, they have always been, but yeah, this was a major controversy at the beginning of 2023. Wizards of the Coast fully retreats from D&D license changes after community outrage. This was a greedy mistake that they made. I say mistake because it showed who they truly are, that they cannot be trusted. They are greedy scumbags in my eyes, as they tried to revise the D&D license, saying that, they wanted some royalty payments pretty much from content creators and companies that use D&D. And that failed spectacularly. They ended up going back on it, but who knows, maybe they'll try this bullshit in the future. And then there was also Wizards of the Coast admitting to using AI art after banning AI art, but they tried doubling down at one point until they couldn't, because it was very blatant, very obvious. And then there's also the fact that Wizards of the Coast is one of those companies that just loves to do very eye-opening things. They race swapped Aragon for Magic the Gathering's Lord of the Rings. Some of these companies, man, it just does not make any sense, some of the decisions. Our goal is a modern take on the work of J.R.R. Tolkien. Just absolutely insane stuff from this company. But they're now in control of Baldur's Gate because of this announcement that came from Sven Vink, the CEO of Larian. This is a video coming from the Game Developers Conference just a couple of days ago.
Baldur Gate will always have a warm spot in our hearts. We'll forever be proud of it, but we're not going to continue it. We're not going to make new expansions, which everybody's expecting us to do. We're not going to make Baldur's Gate 4, which everybody's expecting us to do. We're going to move on. We're going to move away from D&D, and we're going to start making a new thing. I'm saying it here because I'm a forward, and we get bombarded by people that expect us to do these things, but that's not for us. It's going to be up to the Wizards of the Coast, because it's their IP, to find somebody to take on the torch, to think we did our job. And so for us, it's time to get a new puppy.
So that's it. Baldur's Gate is pretty much, it feels like it's going to go dormant again, because I don't think that there's an obvious pick that could be brought in to make a follow-up to a legendary experience that is probably going to age gracefully into the future. Now, there is more to this. We have an article coming here from IGN. Larian Studios won't make Baldur's Gate 3's DLC expansions or Baldur's Gate 4. That is pretty much what Sven Vink just said. But it does continue. Let's just have closure on Baldur's Gate 3. It's been great. We've done our job. In the article, this is an interview that Sven Vink had with IGN at GDC. He said the obvious thing would have been to do a DLC, so we started on one. We started even thinking about Baldur's Gate 4, but we hadn't really had closure on Baldur's Gate 3 yet, and just to jump forward on something new felt wrong. Vink explained that Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, the game that Baldur's Gate 3 is built on, is a bit of a tough thing to roll with when you're designing a video game, noting that his team had all these ideas of new combat we wanted to try out, and they were not compatible. And I think that's a big thing. I really do think that with a licensed IP, you don't have control over the IP. There's constraints, and I think this is an example of that, and I really do think that Sven Vink and his team want to have some freedom with what they want to work on in the future. Not necessarily just with story and stuff, but combat, like he says here. But he does continue, as for putting together the DLC, or that DLC, Vink notes that some exhausted vibes in the studio put an end to it. You could see that the team was doing it because everyone felt like we had to do it, but it wasn't really coming from the heart, and we're very much a studio from the heart. It's what gotten us into misery, and it's also also been the reason for our success. In the new year, Vink recalls coming back into the office and telling his team, we're not going to do it. We're going to start doing these other things that we've talked about, that we planned on doing before we started on Baldur's Gate 3. Let's just have closure on Baldur's Gate 3. It's been great. We've done our jobs. It's a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and that is totally fine in this industry. I do feel like a lot of the expansions, sequels, and stuff we see in this industry is just because of the IP's name, how it has been built. But a company like Larian, they can move on because, again, I do think a lot of it is because they are a private company, not beholden to shareholders necessarily. Contrary to his fears, Vink then recalls a feeling of elation in the studio. I thought that there was going to be anger, where they were going to be angry at me because I couldn't muster the energy. But what he saw was so many elated faces, which I didn't expect, and I could tell they shared the same feelings. So we were all aligned with one another, and I've had so many developers come to me after and say, thank God. So yes, Larian, they are moving on from Baldur's Gate, but it's not completely happening yet. We'll get to that in a second. Sven Vink did follow up in a tweet saying, counter expectations, but I've never been more sure about a strategy shift. This is the right thing for Larian. He continued, I understand there will be disappointment because people fell in love with what we created, but it was a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, and it doesn't need more. The team has grown a lot during Baldur's Gate 3, and I think you can be very excited for what the growth means for our next game. And as everybody looks on in fear with this next remark, he says, as for Baldur's Gate 3 and its characters, they now belong to Wizards of the Coast, and I think they understand how important they are for the community. I trust that they will be treated with respect. Yeah, that one's, that's a remark, I'll tell you that. I don't think that there's any hope that they're going to do this justice, if I'm being honest. It's not easy for us to say goodbye to them, but we also knew from the get-go we'd have to one day. We learned a lot from creating them, and I'm very eager to see those lessons applied to new characters. Also, we're not done with updating Baldur's Gate 3. There's still a bunch of stuff coming, like mod support and extra cinematics for some of the endings, just not new content. And that's actually what was announced just the other day. There is some additional evil endings coming, and again, mod support. So there is technically some new stuff on the way, just there's not going to be expansions or anything like that. They are moving on to their next project, which we don't have any idea on what it is going to be. It sounds like it's something new, but we'll have to see. Now, Sven Vink, there was some more stuff, because a lot of people were reacting, I guess you could say, with, yeah, I kind of understand that Wizards of the Coast is pretty fucking shitty. And Sven Vink said, reading the Reddit threads, I'd like to clear up something. Wizards of the Coast is not to blame for us taking a different direction. On the contrary, they really did their best and have been a great licensor for us, letting us do our thing. This is because it's what's best for Larian. And I understand that, but I also do feel like this definitely plays a role with the fact that they don't own this franchise, and that they're beholden to what Wizards of the Coast wants, and also just to D&D's rules and such. And it is important to note that Larian does have a rocky history in the past with Wizards of the Coast. Because of this, Baldur's Gate 3 lead says there's almost nobody left on the D&D team at Wizards of the Coast from our first meeting. So yeah, I definitely feel like that plays a role in the fact that they're moving on from this franchise. Maybe not like a major role, but that relationship, the fact that nobody at Wizards of the Coast that was originally in those, those first meetings with Larian is there, that has to play somewhat of a role. Now, there is more, because Larian's CEO, the founder, Sven Vink, had a lot more to say about the video gaming industry, which I do feel like is a reflection also on Wizards of the Coast. We'll get to that in a second, but this was a major moment at GDC 2024 as he was accepting award. Baldur's Gate 3 boss Blast Publisher agreed behind layoffs. Now, if you have not been paying attention, the video game industry right now is in crisis mode. In 2023, about 10,000 jobs were lost. We're only about 2 to 3 months into 2024, and we're already up to around 8,000 jobs have been lost. I feel like it's an impact from COVID. A lot of video game publishers went into overdrive, hiring so many different developers, not understanding or really caring with the fact that a lot of these jobs would be redundant once everybody went back to normalcy. And that's exactly what has happened. Profits aren't as high as they were, or they're not making as much money as, I guess, shareholders want. So what's happening is lots and lots of developers are losing their jobs. It is a disaster right now. And it's not necessarily just COVID, I should be saying. It's also a lot of stupid budgets. That's the best way to describe it. A lot of these games, I mean, spending $300-400 million on some of these games is absolutely insane. And it really does go back to the point that this industry needs to scale some of these projects back, especially the live service ambitions, the live service nonsense we've been seeing, microtransaction hell that we're living in. Bringing these projects in, having some games that are more AA, it feels like we've gotten away from that, and we need that. We really do need that for the health of this industry. But this is what Sven Vink said at GDC, which really created a lot of eyebrows. The director of Baldur's Gate 3, Sven Vink, was one of many to speak out about the recent mass layoffs within the video game industry. He blamed the job losses on corporate greed that had been fucking this whole thing up for so long. At GDC in San Francisco, the Independent Games Festival Awards and Game Developers' Choice Awards were full of criticism of companies that had many workers redundant over the past 18 months, during what has been regarded as the worst period ever seen for job security in the video game industry. Greed has been fucking the whole thing up for so long since I started, Vink said, while collecting the GDCA Best Narrative Award for Baldur's Gate 3. I've been fighting publishers my entire life, and I keep on seeing the same mistakes over and over. It's always the quarterly profits. The only thing that matters are the numbers. And then you fire everybody, and then next year you say, shit, I'm out of developers. And then you start hiring people again, and then you do acquisitions, and then you put them in the same loop again, and it's just broken. You don't have to, Vink went on. You can make reserves. Just slow down a bit. Slow down on the greed, be resilient, take care of the people. Don't lose the institutional knowledge that's been built up, and the people you lose every single time, so you have to go through the same cycle over and over and over. It really pisses me off. And I think it pisses a lot of people off because a lot of these video game companies, the many, let's just say, the notorious studios from BioWare, Bethesda, and so on and so forth, all that veteran talent is treated like trash by a lot of these companies. Not necessarily just BioWare and Bethesda, but across this entire industry. They're treated like crap, they're thrown out, and you know what ends up being replaced? It's a junior that comes in that is inexperienced, and then problems arise, and then there's some sort of controversy online that we're all talking about. And a lot of that can be blamed on corporate greed and the fact that these publishers take for granted talent. That is one of the major contributing factors for why Cyberpunk 2077 was such a mess. The video game executives at that company, they knew the problems that were arising during the game's development. They were told by employees and they were ignored. That is kind of the major issue. It's always video game executives just not caring. And a lot of these video game executives are suits that do not care about the entertainment. They do not care about creating the best product possible for gamers. They care about making sure that their shareholders are satisfied. Now, Sven Vink did continue on. He said, for the avoidance of doubt, there are plenty of people in publishing I met who have had their hearts in the right place. The message was for those who try to double their revenue year after year. You don't have to do that. Build more slowly and make your aim improving the state of the art, not squeezing out the last drop. The problem is that these people don't care. And respect the people making the games, you'll find it brings you more joy. But the problem is they get the joy out of their massive salaries. And I do want people to understand what Sven Vink is hitting on, what we've been seeing. Wizards of the Coast. Again, Wizards of the Coast. They slashed about 1,100 jobs towards the end of 2023, and there was outrage because Hasbro's CEO takes home around $9 million. And if you did not know, Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast. Continuing on, Embracer Group, the one company that acquired like 50-something different studios across the entire, all these smaller companies, they all were put together, and then a massive deal with Saudi Arabia ended up collapsing, and Embracer collapsed. They ended up firing, I think, over 1,000 developers so far, and the CEO said layoffs are something that everyone needs to get through, which at a recent game developers event, this was what Greg Miller made a joke about.
There are two phrases everyone in this room, everyone in video games never wants to hear, and number one is people online are mad, and number two is the Embracer Group is here.
Yeah, that would be the Embracer Group CEO, I believe.
They've really fucked this place up, haven't they? It's fucking crazy.
Yeah, I mean, they acquired many different studios from Eidos Montreal, all these Saber Interactive, all these different companies, 4A Games, so many, and it all looked like it was going according to plan until the fact that Saudi Arabia deal that they were relying on, I think it was up to $3 billion, fell through, and they collapsed, which was a worry that a lot of people had when they were acquiring all these smaller different studios. But now they're selling everybody off. It really is madness with how many jobs have been lost, and they're going to continue to happen. Embracer Group has pretty much said as much, but this is what I'm also talking about. They laid off 97 Eidos Montreal employees and canceled the new Deus Ex game, one of my favorite franchises. Jesus, Deus Ex deserves so much better. But continuing on, Electronic Arts. This was major news recently. Electronic Arts laid off around 670 workers, and they sunsetted various games. They also moved away from future licensed IP. They are pretty much done with Star Wars outside of the next Jedi game, Star Wars Jedi game with Cal Kestis. And then it seems like that's it. Which, say what you want, but that's Electronic Arts. I guess they love their EAFC, they love Madden, and not much else outside of that in terms of licensed IP. PlayStation, they also cut about 900 jobs. It was hilarious because the CEO at the time, Jim Ryan, ended up going to one of these studios, and then 5 days later, he fired all of them, or he had to have known at the time. Microsoft also fired about 1,900 earlier on this year. Blizzard's president, Mike Ybarra, who was very excited about working with Microsoft, ended up leaving as well. They also canceled various projects, including a survival game that Blizzard was working on. Just madness in this industry. Epic Games, another company that has taken the stance of being the kind of like one of the top companies in this industry. Tim Sweeney, the CEO, has been kind of mocking a lot of the troubles that have been happening in this industry because of how great Epic Games has been doing. Well, they've fired 830. Because look, the thing is, especially with these publicly traded companies, eventually shit is going to hit the fan, and it's going to show the true nature of these companies, and that's exactly what's happened with Epic Games. They've shown their true face, and that they're just one of these other corporate entities in the video game industry that cannot be trusted. Again, everything was going smooth. They were hiring so many different people, especially when Fortnite was making tons and tons of money, and it still is, but once things start to dip just a little bit, this is what happens. Riot Games also ended up firing over 500, and look, just in February alone, 2,000 jobs were lost. In January, it was much worse. About 6,000 developers were lost. This brings the total right now to over 8,000, and that was just a couple of weeks ago. We'll see what happens towards the end of the year, how many jobs have been lost, but I do always go back to this. Nintendo CEO, this is something a lot of us always bring up. It's always brought up when these layoffs happen, but we don't have these CEOs in this gaming industry outside of the private companies like Sven Vink. Nintendo CEO once halved his salary to prevent layoffs, and it worked. Why that's so uncommon today? Why it's uncommon is because there's a lot more soups. The video game industry has grown. It has changed a lot in the last 20 years. It has become more corporate than ever. These are massive behemoth entities with these companies, and a lot of these suits that are in charge do not care about the betterment of gaming entertainment, and that is not going to change anytime soon. That's why I do think it is important to support the companies that are doing it right, like Larian Studios. And I do feel like one of the messages, one of the ways to success, it does appear to be, it really is being a private company, not one of those companies that is beholden to shareholders. But that is obviously not the only way to make stuff like this work, and it really is also just always planning for things to eventually hit the fan. But unfortunately, that doesn't appear to ever happen. These companies are more than happy to fire as many developers as possible, but it always seems to be that chaos ends up happening because that veteran talent that they rely on, they're very much needed for creating breathtaking, amazing experiences. Now, again, looking at the video game industry right now, it is honestly a bloodbath, not necessarily just with video game layoffs, but I mean, you have Blizzard wondering if you'll pay $100 for Diablo 4 DLC. We got more live service dumpster fires like Skull and Bones, which I think we all knew was going to be an exceptionally boring live service shipping sim, which just honestly looks pathetic in so many different ways. And then I understand people will defend this crap, but Dragon's Dogma 2, I don't care for... This used to be cheat codes years ago, people. I do not understand how this became so normalized. And yeah, there was a time where this was cheat codes. And even in multiplayer games, say like Call of Duty, there was all kinds of like emblems and things that you could customize yourself with as you rank up. You could earn it. There wasn't microtransactions. There was none of that there. Everything you could do, cosmetics, all of that stuff, it was all earnable in the game. That is something I feel like this generation does not understand, and they seem to be okay with spending $20, $40, $60, $70, $80, $90 on a fucking cosmetic. That is insane, and that does concern me with the fact that this industry is becoming more and more greedy. Obviously, I don't think the greed has changed, but I feel like the greed has become more, people just are okay with it, and that is is a problem. And I do feel like that isn't necessarily just something that is impacting consumers, but obviously developers as well, as so many different jobs continue to be lost here in 2024. And that does appear to be something that's not going to be slowing down anytime soon. And that is why, again, it is very important to support the studios that are doing consumers, doing developers right, such as Larian. Anyway, what is your thoughts on all this? What is your thoughts on the state of the video game industry? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video or if you found any informative value, and consider subscribing for more videos like this. And I'll see you later.